Hello and welcome to Author Hour. I am your host, Richard Lyntton, author of North Korea Deception and Hyde Park Deception. Today, I would like to welcome local author Debbie Murphy, whose debut children's book, Jackie and the Mona Lisa, the story of how the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, brought the Mona Lisa to America, was just released this year. Debbie has been an elementary school teacher for 29 years, you don't look old enough, and started her writing career writing professional books for teachers for Scholastic Publishing. Debbie's passion is getting children interested in reading, the arts, and those little known stories that, as she says, have fallen through the cracks of history. Welcome, Debbie. Tell us about this. I just want to dive straight into it. It's just such an amazing book, Jackie and the Mona Lisa. How did this come about? Let's just start right there, Debbie.
Sure. Well, I'm such a history nut. I love museums. I love to go to historical places. And I like to read about it as well. So I saw a book on, I think it was Amazon, and it's an adult book about this same event. Okay. It's called Mona Lisa and Camelot. And it's the story of all the negotiating that Jackie did to get Mona Lisa here. And I just couldn't believe Mona Lisa was in America. Right. And so I was asking other people about it and telling them, and they said, I never knew that. Right. And I love when you can teach someone something new, and especially a lot of adults, even people who were living at that time, didn't know about it. And the incredible thing is that her bringing Mona here brought so many people into museums. And just sort of the everyday person who might not have, they were working very hard, they didn't have time to visit a museum. The lines, it was almost 2 million people. Crazy. And
was that for the White House and the
combined,
what was the other gallery it went to?
The Metropolitan Museum in New York. Yeah. And there was just so many little stories with it. There was a little boy who brought his dog and he hid it in his coat because he wanted the dog to see Mona Lisa. And when kids know what that picture is, even if they don't know the name of it. Right. It's so well known. So that was such a draw because not everyone's going to get to Paris, and they thought, I can say I saw it. Yeah. So
have you seen it in Paris?
I actually have. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because you had said that you had seen it too. And it's like so far away from where you can, you can't stand near it. It's under all the glass. Well, thank goodness it is because of things that have happened to it. Right. But
what did you think when you saw it? Were you disappointed or were you pleased?
I think I felt so good just to experience seeing her. But it's like everybody says, oh, it's so much smaller. It's so much, it's bigger than life when you see her poster somewhere or you see it's in ads. I show the kids, when I do author visits, I show them all these ads that Mona Lisa is in because she's so recognizable.
When you go and see the children, I noticed when we first met, you had this big card, which we can show everybody, and it has kind of fun, different depictions of the Mona Lisa. Tell me a little bit about that board and how you use it when you go and talk to children.
Well, first, what I start out with when I introduce the book is I show them, I think, famous works of art, but they might not know them because they're not as well known to maybe children. And I'll say, raise your hand if you recognize this, and then I'll show Mona, and they all raise their hand. And then we talk about how famous she was. And she became famous, which I don't know if I can go into the story if I'm allowed.
Yeah, absolutely.
From what I've read, the reason she's so recognizable and famous is because in the early 1900s, she was stolen from the Louvre. And at
by
that
an Italian, right?
Yes, because he believed Leonardo was Italian, it should be back in Italy.
I mean, that's a whole story in itself. I read that and I thought, how does an Italian steal the Mona Lisa? But sorry.
Right, no, and there's actually books about that. Okay. And at that time, that's when sort of international communications was coming about. So it became this giant mystery in the world. Right. So people who not necessarily would have been in Paris at that time or in France, they knew about it all over the world. Right. And it became such a mystery that it became so famous. Right. And I show the kids that people would come and look at the blank wall and leave flowers because it was missing for 2 years. I
see, how interesting. But going back to the history of it, so what I found fascinating is that you know, you didn't know, I didn't realize, or no one realized that before Jackie Kennedy moved into the White House, that it was really drab and boring. So just tell us a little bit about what she did, because again, I had no idea until I read your children's book that the White House wasn't like always like that.
Right. Well, she, as it says in the book, she visited as a child, which to me is such a neat parallel. And then she comes back as First Lady.
Right. Keep talking. I just want to show these incredible, you know, illustrations, really fun illustrations.
So when she, you know, she was very cultured. She was very much into literature and history. And when she went as a child, she couldn't believe there wasn't a guidebook, or there wasn't anything. And a lot of the furniture, what would happen in the past is when a president left the White House, they would either sell the furniture or take some of the furniture, and then they would just put their own in. Right. So here it is, the most, you know, this is where the president has lived, not Washington, but I guess it was Adams was the first president. And there wasn't any history to it. And so that was her aim when she came back. She wanted to make it a museum. And she wanted people to go there and see the history of the presidency. Right. And I've actually been there.
Oh, you have?
Well, I student taught in Maryland, and our school trip was to the White House, which was so neat.
Can people go there nowadays, or do you? I thought it was only special visitors nowadays. Now, you can't just go. Can you just go to the White House, get tickets, and go to the White House?
I think you have to. At one point, someone told me that you would have to go to your local politician.
Oh, that's right.
And they get permission, and then that would be how you would get in to get a ticket.
This show is about writing, Debbie. This is your first book. Just very briefly, what were the other books you wrote for Scholastic? Like, were they more? What were they about?
So what I started out, my first, because you said teaching for 29 years. Right. I just love coming up with ideas for how to just make kids very interested in, obviously, the content of what you're teaching. And so I created some lessons myself, and I was able to get them in a teacher magazine. Fantastic. And that was my first, you know, foray into writing, published writing. And then Scholastic has their like paperbacks, and you buy them. One can be about teaching geometry or teaching literature or teaching author's craft. And so I came up with an idea, which ties in with Jackie, of how to teach kids to love biographies. Okay. And that was my first book for Scholastic. And you can use it with any biography. So the kids can research whoever they're interested in. And there's all different ways to present, because kids don't always, you know, learn in the same way. And
so this is for teachers to use to help children write biographies.
Exactly. And express what they've learned. Right. And I also did one that was about how they can present nonfiction. Because as teachers know, not all kids are, you know, writers where they write a full essay. They like to present in different ways. There's artistic kids, there's kinesthetic learning. Right. So that's one of them. Yeah.
So how many have you done?
I actually have 10.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. But they're
But can people buy those?
You can on the Scholastic teacher site.
So just look up Debbie Murphy. So if anyone's watching and they're a teacher, you know, but seriously, because we've got your this book's information, but if they are teachers and they want to look up, so they just go to Scholastic.
And it is on Amazon too.
Oh, it is on Amazon. So but just type in Debbie Murphy on Amazon.
Yes,
that sounds really interesting. Wow, how amazing.
It just is, some of them are out of print.
So tell me what the dream, what was the dream? Because obviously you're a writer, you've written lots of books, which I've only just found out about. I didn't realize you'd written so many books. Oh. But anyway, what was the dream? Was the dream always to write a children's book, or was that more accidental?
That was always the dream. And when people say, oh, like, how did this come about? Yep. And I know that I got the contract in 2019. It takes so long. It didn't come out till this March and COVID. Yeah. But I've been writing I have all these different stories on my computer. Yep. And I get very inspired. And when I read the adult version of how Mona Lisa came, I thought kids would really like that. And it'd be a neat way to get them interested in art and culture. Yep. So I had that on my computer. I submitted.
To different publishers?
To different publishers, wow. You know, rejection. Yeah. And finally, Sleeping Bear Press, which is a wonderful press out of Michigan. Yeah. They said, we love the story. I remember screaming when I read the email. So sweet. Because it takes so long. And that's why I teach the kids in my class perseverance.
How many letters did you write to publishers?
Oh, gosh. Well, the story took on different themes. Like I would change it and then resubmit.
For them?
So probably maybe 10,
Wow.
12, maybe more.
Over what period of time?
Probably 8 years.
Okay, wow. So just so everyone understands, this is what it takes to be an author. Trial and error, keep sending, never giving up. And I have to say, I mean, it's just something about this book. It's like such a great little story, based on truth, based on fact. Fantastic illustrations.
She did do a wonderful job.
Tell us how that works. So you get the letter from the publisher. Talk a little bit about how they marry you up with an illustrator and whether you have any choice in that illustrator, or how does that all work?
Well, my editor, her name's Sarah Rocket. She's amazing. She's very much into saying, this is your book. I'm giving you the suggestions, but you tell me, are you passionate about these changes, or do you want to keep this? And I don't know if all editors are like that. But she,
in terms of which illustrator you work with?
Well, that was what I was going to put. Well, that was the writing. But with Illustrator, she said, well, what do you see as the type of illustrations? And she was able to let me, I was looking around at certain, art, and I sent her what I thought would be best to really bring the story to life. And they found Jen Bricking, and she's amazing. And she did so much research. Right. A lot of the illustrations are direct representations of real photos. And when I do author visits, I show them, like, this is what it looked like in a photograph, and this is how she made it. So,
so did they... You just submitted sort of artwork that you like. It wasn't like you had 10 illustrators to choose from. They said, do you like this person, Jen? And you said, yeah, look, she's great. That's exactly what I wanted. Is that how it worked? Well,
I showed them what I liked, and then they actually go and they make the decision. Amazing. And you hope that they make a good decision.
So theirs is the final decision. Mm-hmm. Okay. So then what happens? So then how long does it take for the artist, for the illustrator, do they just give you like a couple of pages? Do they give you the whole book? How does that work?
Well, we work on the writing part, and her, Jen's part, I don't even really get to, I don't really communicate with her. She takes my text and she does her vision. She draws her vision. But because she actually was living out on the West Coast, she just moved east. So I would get piecemeal, like when she finished the cover, my editor knows how I was chomping at the bit for the picture. She sent that to me, and I could see what the cover looked like. And then they'll send you some sketches. What did you think? Oh, I was just like, oh my gosh.
So you got it in an email, like in a PDF file?
Yes.
And what? Tell us.
I just was. I quick made a color copy, and I just was so, because it just was brilliant. And it just so eye-catching in the red, and it's exactly how I pictured this, because this type of story, you don't want the illustrations to be too cartoony, or you don't want them to be too severe that children wouldn't be drawn into the story. I think she did a perfect.
I agree. I mean, it is. It's the red and the blue, so sort of the America thing, and then the Mona Lisa. It is. But the point is, it's your creation, your idea, your story. And so I just feel that this book, I mean, I kept wishing, I wish I was, back with my two boys who are now 18 and 21, whatever they are, I forget. But I wish they were tiny again so I could just sit there and read it. Because even my mum, I remember, my mum has long since passed, like talking about, Jackie Kennedy. And I'm just thinking, God, wouldn't that be great because it's generation, not timeless, generationless. So in other words, any generation is going to read this and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. It could be a grandparent, it could be your parents, it could be the children themselves. I think that's what's so genius about this book, and I think that's why it's doing so well. Congratulations again. And tell me about this wonderful. You sent it to the First Lady.
I did, and I'd like to credit my cousin had worked on, because Jill Biden.
Just show that up for a second.
Oh, sorry. Does a lot of.
Story.
Well, my cousin does a lot of work for cancer research, and she was on a team with Dr. Biden. And so she she didn't know her as much personally, but she sort of knew a way that we could at least get the book to her, because it's so hard with all the different avenues. So I was able to write a letter and send the book to her assistant, to Joe Biden's assistant. And I waited and waited. And even though that says August 1st on the letter, I didn't receive that till the end of September. It came in the mail, and it's like you see a big envelope that says the White House. And she read it, and then I thought it's the typewritten note, and you're like, oh, that's still so great. But then she wrote that little personal note.
Loved your book. Loved your book. That's so
oh my
sweet.
God! And I just thought, oh, the book is in the White House.
That's so sweet.
So it's sort of like came back.
I know. It's such a great story. Oh my goodness, it's so true. Loved your book. She said again. If you didn't see it the first time, but we can show that you in a close up. What I remember reading about you said your father encouraged you. Your hopes and dreams. Tell me what you meant by that.
Well, I think I've always, my dad, he passed away a couple years ago. He would see me get a rejection letter, and he said, you just got to keep trying. I know you can do this. You're so talented. And he said that. I'm not toot my own horn. And my dad was, when I was little, my dad was such a great drawer. I always loved art.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, halfway through college, I was going to change my major from elementary to art. But then my parents said, oh no, because that'd be 2 more years of college and we're not paying for that. But he just always, he loved story writing. He loved movies. He loved all those things that get to people, tell a story. And so he always said, just keep trying, keep trying. And unfortunately, he wasn't alive to see this, but I dedicated it to him. And I think in my heart, he's in the White House. Like his name was read in the White House. So cool. And it just warms my heart.
Yeah. What did you, when the children, what I was thinking was how cool would it be? You walk into a classroom and you're just meeting your teacher for the first time, and on the bookshelf, which I presume is sitting in your classroom, is your book. Tell me some of the reactions of the children when you say you've written a book.
Well, well, it's funny because a lot of times they don't think it's that hard to get it published because they see, oh, this is a great story. It has pictures. They get really excited. And in fact, we have library 1 day a week, and my books are in our school library, and they'll come back from library and say, I got your book. I got your book. And then last year when my book came out, I had an author visit at Newtown Bookshop, which is in my hometown, and all my kids came. And it was just so, they were so magnificent. Great. It just made me feel so great. And they were so supportive, all my parents.
Oh my goodness, that's so fantastic. But when they see, so you don't have it in the classroom? Oh,
I do have it in the classroom as well. We talk about, because I love to teach writing, so we talk about, I tell them, when I give you suggestions for your writing, that's what happens to me. I said, even it happens when you proofread someone's work when they're handing in a report in a business world. So it's not that your writing isn't good. It's just they're giving you ideas how to make it better. So I show them that process, and then I show them, what some of the illustrations would have looked like before they became the illustrations in the book. And
fantastic. Do you have an idea for new ideas? Like, how is that going to work? Because I can totally see this as a series. By the way, there was one thing I wanted to say. The way you've written this, is it all true? Like all the little bits and pieces, you haven't embellished the story. Like,
no,
it's all actually happened. The way you've told it.
Yes, and you have to do all that research and support it. Even at one point, my editor said, "Can you check on this fact? Can you?" And they have fact checkers
because they wanted it to be factual.
Right, because you don't want to put that out there as a nonfiction story if you have just sort of are telling it. You should have the facts.
I mean, it's fun. It's like, oh wow, did that really happen? Oh my goodness, that happened. Because it was before I was born, and I'm seeing before you were born. So that's why people don't know about it, because it really was so long ago. It's like what the First Lady Jackie Kennedy did for the White House. So that's really interesting. And then so going back to how do you move on from here? Because this is like a total slam dunk success.
Sweet.
How do you go to the next stage? Like what plans do you have?
Well, I do have one idea that I really like the story, books to not teach make them learn a lesson, but in their heart learn a lesson.
Yeah.
And so my one idea is about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia, who were best buddies. They called themselves on the Supreme Court. And timely enough, people with polar opposite ways they look at the world, they were very much that way, but they were best friends because they were able to come up with, how do we disagree in a respectful way? How do we get our point across without making the other person's point seem like it's wrong?
Yeah.
And they helped each other out. They would give each other their opinions, and then they would actually edit them and say, well, this, I think you should embellish this point or make this more into this point. So even though it was not their opinion, they didn't, agree, they would tell them how to make it better, and they appreciated each other for that instead of thinking each other were tearing each other down.
Yeah, sure.
And I just think kids really,
so is that your next,
that's what I'm working on.
That's
yes.
Nice. Yeah, that would totally work. And then presumably you would work with the same publisher and the same illustrator. Hopefully.
And I'm hoping that.
Right. Yeah.
But I do really like the whole history little story bend to everything.
How do you think, because I have to say, as a kid, I don't know what happened with my museum visits, but I know that you're really passionate about, museums and art and getting kids there. I feel like I must have had such a terrible experience because I've just always been turned off by museums. I love theater and I love sort of places, but museums as such, maybe it was crowds. I feel like, we went to Paris this last summer and, went to l'Orangerie, and it was so wonderful because there weren't that many people. And I felt for the first time I could just really look and look and look. And I don't like to stand for hours in front of paintings. And Monet, that's right. We went to Monet. There was Monet there. Met everyone. All the French masters were there. But anyway, so I just always think back and think to myself, why am I not more interested in museums? What do you do now as a teacher these days with all the social media technology? What do you do to get what grade are your children?
I teach second grade.
Okay. So what do you do to get them interested? And where do you like to take them?
I think, first of all, I have two sons, Griffin and Chase. Shout out. I made them come to the museums when they were just even babies.
Yeah.
And I think what you have to do is you almost have to, if you want to really get them interested, is to really look for things that would get their interest.
Them personally?
Not everything is going to speak to them.
Right.
So for me, when I go to a museum, I love listening to it's always great to have someone talk to you about, not just looking at it yourself, but those experts, which one day I would actually like to be. I'd love to be a museum docent. Okay. But they give you those behind the scenes.
Right.
And I think that's what draws, we all love, wow, that's so neat.
Yeah.
And I think if you get kids in and then you sort of curate it for them, that's what gets them interested. Because I know even in my own class.
How do you do that when
they don't want to go?
There's a big group. I think that was what put me off. It was I felt like a cat, sheep being herded around.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you say, you've got to get that individual connection. So, and I think maybe do they give kids audiobooks or the talkie thing so they can listen on their own speed? Do they do that nowadays?
I don't know if they have them necessarily made for the kids. I feel like they might nowadays, but they do. A lot of the museums do have it's self-guided, so you can put on the.
But for children, do they do that? I wonder.
They might. That's actually something interesting to find out because that would help as well. Yeah. Because if you had that large group.
Yeah.
I think as a class, I used to teach third grade and we went to a local history museum and they actually brought us into a room and sat us down and we had someone who told us a story of the things in the museum.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, you want to get them interested in the different pieces and then they might go off and say, oh.
Telling a story. I think that's the key. What I did used to love was going to the library and sitting down and the lady there would read the books, right? You walked around to the local library and, she had two or three books. So somehow, because there was a story involved, I wonder if there's not something in that with museums, if you somehow get the stories within the museum as opposed to just saying, I don't know. I'm sort of thinking out loud here.
Right. No. And I think that it takes thought to try to figure out how to, especially now, with TikTok and all those things online.
That's all very interesting.
You have to, I think museums are now trying to reinvent themselves on how to appeal through those avenues. I'm not quite sure how they're all working on it, but I think they're trying to figure out a way to make that art and that those centerpieces appealing to children.
What are your favorite museums locally?
Well, I love the Philadelphia Art Museum.
Do you take your children there? Do the children go there?
Well, we actually, my school at least, we've had them canceled because of COVID recently, but we've gone to the zoo, the Elmwood Park Zoo, which is a neat place to visit. And I tell kids, like, it doesn't have to, isn't it? And it's just so.
And they're very kind of user-friendly, aren't they? They're kid-friendly.
And it's not overwhelming.
Right, exactly.
I think that kids have sometimes a mistaken idea that it just has to be paintings or just has to be artwork. And when I do my visits, I show them there's museums for so many different things. There's science museums, there's history museums, there's even one for video games, there's math. So just getting them interested, going somewhere to learn something. Because even the zoo, there's little stories. See, that's to me, the draws of stories.
Yeah. It's all about the story. What advice do you have for someone who's maybe a teacher or whatever, but they want to write a children, that's one of their dreams. What advice would you give, like practical advice?
Well, I belong to a group called the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and I joined that before my kids were born, and they're 23 and 24, and they have a lot of opportunities for you to meet agents and publishers and other writers. And you don't have to be published, but you learn so much.
So what is that called again, one more time?
It's called the Society of Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI.
Is that for children's books specifically?
It's just for children specifically. But I went to a conference in New York. And for example, it's hard to get, if you just blindly send your manuscript in, they call it the slush pile. It might never be seen, or it's seen by someone's assistant and they just, but when you go to those, sometimes if there's an agent there or if there's an editor there, because you've shown that extra interest and put in the work, they'll say, put that you met me or put that you were in my session and I will put it in a special place. So I think it's like anything. It's not like you have to, the people will get you published, but it gets you closer because it's a big industry. And
that's a great tip. Anything else? Like, what about writing habits? Like when do you like to either create or brainstorm or write? Because you're a busy teacher. You must be exhausted most days.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, summer.
You do have the long holidays. That's helpful.
Which is nice. It's funny. I get like inspiration from even just if I'm watching a TV show and they talk, because I love historical TV shows as well. I'll hear something like, oh, that's a neat idea, and I'll either type it in on my phone or write it down. I'm so old school. I still like to write first and then type. And a lot of times I'll just write pieces of sentences or ideas, and then I go back and I try to put them together, and that's when I type.
Okay.
Because I'm not the best typist either. So my mind goes faster than I can type. So I'll take a lot of notes and write things down and then go back to it and see how I can piece them together.
And is there a time or a place that you like to write in?
It's whenever I can find quiet, I guess. I sort of like have just a special spot on my couch that I sit and when no one's around. And
I mean, it's like just, whatever works, right?
Exactly. And when my kids were small, I would just have to find like when they went to bed or, a time where I could go to the library. I love libraries too. So that's.
Do you work in libraries sometimes?
No.
I would like to go.
I'd love to go. Well, I tutor as well. So sometimes I tutor at the library, but ever since I was a little kid, the library is so magical.
Is your book in the library, Radnor Library? Do you know?
I do not know. I know it's in my local library.
You should go over there. You should go over it while you're here.
Oh, maybe I will.
Because by the way, if you are a writer, you can just walk into public libraries and say hi, introduce. I did that at the Radnor Library, and they took both my books, very kindly. And in fact, that's how I got this job working here. They said they were looking for someone to do an author out, funnily enough. So you never know.
I think this is great.
Yeah, so you never know what might happen if you go to
I was actually going to ask you that, Richard.
Absolutely. Is there anything else in your life that inspired you to write? So you talked about your dad. Any other sort of events in your life that sort of inspired you to start writing?
I don't know. It's just always been with me. I've always liked writing like little stories, or even when you read a story and you think of ways that you could end it differently.
Right.
In fact, I found my third grade diary.
Yep.
My mom had it in her house, and I was reading through it, and basically we call it a bed-to-bed story for kids. Like, you write, you woke up this morning, did this, went to bed. And I was looking at it, I'm like, well, at least I was writing.
Right, absolutely.
But the neat thing was, actually, you would like this, it was the year Princess Di or Lady Di married Charles. So in my entry, it said, I woke up very early and watched the royal wedding.
Wow.
And I thought, and that's what I tell kids too. Just you writing that down is a piece of history, because when you go to a museum, you'll see a diary of a Civil War soldier. Right. Or they didn't know it was going to be in a museum.
Thank you so much, Debbie Murphy, for joining us today on Author Hour. You can, of course, find Debbie's book on Amazon, or visit www.debbierovin.com to find out more. And finally, in honor and celebration of the life of Queen Elizabeth II, please enjoy this non-fiction royal memoir of my great-aunt Flo, Florence Bramford, who traveled the world on royal tours under two Queen Elizabeths. The book is called From Cottage to Palace and is part of the Worcestershire and Malvern History series, also available on Amazon and Audible. Thanks so much, Debbie.